Welcome on this balmy day. And just so you won't feel any kind of issues going back out into the warm, we've tried to keep it as warm as possible in here too. It's a joke. The first thing I wanted to mention is thank you all for being here on time and signing in with Dan. She'll be here on an ongoing basis every Tuesday at 4:40 so that you can sign in. And she'll remain here 10 minutes after the speaker so that if you haven't had a chance, if you came in late or if you haven't had a chance to check in with her, that you can do that afterwards. Any questions on check-in? Some people have asked me again what happens if you're absent. The ideal situation would be that you all write Dan a note beforehand to say that you're absent, and then once the speaker video is available, and it's usually a good week after the presentation, watch that and turn in the survey. And the surveys really are important to us. We do track them being filled out. We don't track who says something positive or negative, but I definitely read all of them and use that for feedback for the speaker and also for speakers who we have going forward. Because one of the questions is, as the speaker was talking, did it bring to mind anybody you'd like to hear from? So please remember to fill out those surveys. Last week, I also mentioned that I thought we might have 2 more speakers come, and it does look like we will. So October 7th and 14th, which are currently not on the syllabus, will be on the syllabus. We'll have one speaker from Medallia, and another speaker, I don't know if you've heard of them, but a bunch of the engineers who are running Medallia are from Cal. And then on the 14th, we'll have a gentleman who started early with Google, and then went to one of China's largest companies called Tencent. And then last but not least, on November 18th, there'll be an optional workshop that you can sign up for. We have a visiting scholar, an Italian who's a visiting scholar from Germany. So that should tell you how interesting it might be. But he's gonna do a workshop on, are you an entrepreneur? And it's a 2-hour workshop in one of our time slots, but it'll be an optional sign up. And last but not least, next week's speaker will be more of a fireside chat. If you don't know what that is, we'll basically be in chairs and we'll be having questions as opposed to a more formal presentation. In preparation for that, Dan will be sending out a note where you can read a little bit about Ramona, who's our speaker, next week, and there are 2 short videos to watch. What I'd like you all to do is take some time to watch those, or watch one of them at least, and come up with 1 or 2 questions that you'd like to have asked. Because on Friday, I'll be sending her an initial list of questions, and then obviously next Tuesday, you're free to ask any questions from the audience as well, but I wanted to have some starter questions. This is a fascinating woman who was a math prodigy here at Cal and then had an incredible accident. She has a very popular TED Talk, which some of you may have seen, so you'll be looking at that. Any questions while I'm up here? No question is too small? Okay. With that, by way of introduction for today's speaker, I want to take you back a long time ago. 2 weeks ago, when Professor Sidhu started this course, he talked about the fact that there are 2 different kinds of entrepreneurs. Perhaps you'll recall that he showed a slide with a gentleman named Larry Buck, and he pointed out that Larry was a connector. And 2 other people who are different types of entrepreneurs were the Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and that they're builders. What I think is particularly interesting about our speaker today, Orin Hoffman, is that he seems to be both. He's a builder, but he's also a connector. He gets kudos because he's also a Cal grad from the College of Engineering, from IEOR, go Bears. And he's an extremely active CEO, advisor, investor who both builds and connects. He started building, in fact, when he was still, as far as I know, he built earlier, but what I could tell, when he was still here at Cal, and he formed Kyber Systems at Berkeley, which he sold right after graduation. He went on to found and sell a website, Get Relevant, found and sell, or be CEO and sell BridgePath. He's currently the president of LiveRamp, which maybe not surprisingly, is about connections. In fact, looking at the connections and unifying customer data across disparate applications. LiveRamp is interesting, not just because maybe you'll get a kick out of this. Whenever I look at the name, it looks like liver ramp, but it's not. It's LiveRamp. There's a big R in there. It's interesting also because that company was formerly known in its previous life as, Orin, maybe you can help me, I should know this, Ramp, something with Ramp, which I don't have in my notes, but he also went on to sell that. And in fact, it was bought for $300 million recently by Axiom. He has also, as part of that company, brought a number of individuals together. In fact, on an annual basis, they hold a huge symposium in February, bringing people together. And perhaps he'll talk more about his role in connecting people in his speech today. He's been an investor in so many companies that he actually has them listed in alphabetical order on his LinkedIn site, which it's the first I've seen it that way. He appears to have his finger in so many different areas and his finger on so many different pulses that I look forward to hearing him speak today, a little bit more about what he does, and frankly, I'd like to hear about how he manages on a daily basis and is so generous with his time, especially with his time here today. So with that, Orin Hoffman, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna talk about kind of one very narrow topic today, but we can get into discussion later about other topics. I'm really gonna talk about how to grow. So all of you are, I presume most of the people in the audience, how many people are not students? Okay, so almost everybody, 99.9%, looks like are students. So we're gonna talk about how to grow, which should be particularly interesting to you, how to manage your career path, et cetera. But what my one assignment to you, as students you always get assignments, my one assignment to you is start thinking about questions, because we're gonna run through some of these slides pretty quickly, and then hopefully we can make this very interactive and go through a bunch of questions about some of these things. So first off, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll talk about how to grow. So, the title today is How to Be Absolutely Awesome, and that's basically the goal today. Now, the goal is I'm going to try to teach you about how to be absolutely awesome. I'm not absolutely awesome myself, though. I am a Cal alum. I graduated in 1996. I run a company called LiveRamp today. We recently sold it to Axiom. Actually, about 2 months ago, we sold the company. And then and there's a few other things about me. You can Google me or tweet me or whatever it might be. First off, before we start, what's the definition of an entrepreneur? Who's got a good definition of an entrepreneur? Come on, you're Cal students. You probably have got something good. Yes.
A risk taker that tries to solve a problem in the community.
Okay, a risk taker that tries to solve a problem in the community. Yep, that's a good one. Who else? Okay, we definitely don't have that many entrepreneurs in the room. Yes?
Someone who creates something that's never been created before.
Someone who creates something that's never been created before. Okay, who else? Yeah, in the back there.
A person that turns ideas into reality.
A person who turns ideas into reality. Yep, that's good. Well, yes, sir?
Someone that does something in a way that it's never been done in before.
Okay, someone who does something never been done before. Right, these are all very typical, these are very good definitions of what an entrepreneur is. You're really good. I'm gonna give you my definition, which is slightly different, take a slightly different take on it. So my definition of an entrepreneur is someone that steals office supplies from home and brings them to work. Right? These are, essentially that means anyone can be an entrepreneur. You don't have to start a company to be an entrepreneur. You could be a teacher and be an entrepreneur. You could be someone who was in the military and be an entrepreneur. There's lots of different people. You could do something entrepreneurial even in a non-entrepreneurial environment. So being an entrepreneur is really taking ownership of something that maybe typically people wouldn't take ownership of. And so my goal isn't to convince you all to go start a company, because that's not for everybody. But my goal is to get all of you to be an entrepreneur and to think like an entrepreneur. Now first, let me take a step back and really kind of go into some kind of my kind of career advice, what one should be thinking about in their career. So I'm going to start with the first thing, which is basically, unless you're going to be awesome, you're going to be outsourced in the future. The future world is going to look a lot different than the past world. In the future, basically the dollars flow to the very best people. And if you are not going to be the very best in what you pick in, you can be at risk at being outsourced. You can be outsourced by technology, or you can be outsourced by people, or you could be outsourced by a combination of both. You want to be the outsourcer and not the person being outsourced. Does that make sense? So essentially, you need to find a niche that you can be great at. And you can't just take a profession that's typically done well, like a lawyer or a software engineer, and think that that will be good in the future. I don't think it will be, because computers are getting much better at what they do, and we're living in a globalized world. So if you're thinking about what you should be doing in your career, it really means you need to figure out something based on your own capabilities where you can be awesome at. You don't want to be a professional baseball player unless you can get to the major leagues. And you don't even want to just be in the major leagues for 1 year. That's not very good. You kind of need to then be in the major leagues for probably at least 7 years. So you need to be really good if you're trying to pick that path. So you need to understand what your skills are before you kind of pick that path as you go forward. The other thing that I think is very important is we're living in a different world than we lived in the past. In the 20th century, that century was dominated by systems thinking. And systems thinking, probably the best way to think about, are you a good systems thinker or not, is the SAT test. The SAT test is a very good test to test for people who are good systems thinkers. And if you were a very good systems thinker, you were probably at the top of the food chain in the 20th century. And that's because we had to do all these systems-related things in the 20th century. Now, the one thing that computers are incredibly good at is systems thinking. And they're better at systems thinking than anyone in this room. Even the best person in the room at systems thinking is no match for even a half-decent computer. So you need to figure out a way you're going to be competitive with that computer in the future. I think one way is to focus on creativity. Creativity is very hard for a lot of computers to do, and it will likely trump systems thinking in the future. So there's many different intelligence. Probably people here are very good systems thinking intelligence. Probably people here are also very good at creative intelligence. Putting those together are obviously even more powerful. You need to have some baseline in systems thinking to be successful. But basically the differential between somebody who scored in the 95th percentile in the SAT and someone who scored in the 100th percentile in the SAT was massive in the past. I don't think that will be true in the future. Probably once you hit kind of 80, it's probably quite good. And then all the other kind of things that computers can't do are going to be the difference in the future. So you should be concentrating on as many of those things as possible. I kind of have a couple different examples of things that we can take a look at together. So I think things that will be less valued in the future are general knowledge. I think things that are much more valued in the future will be judgment. Judgment is incredibly difficult to teach. It's really hard to do. People get more judgment as they age, but there's plenty of 16-year-olds with good judgment. And so one of the things that when we're always looking for is people with good judgment. People who can do the right types of things in different scenarios. And of course, we know why. Another less valued thing is knowing more, than one spoken language. I think we'll have universal translators in the future. But knowing how to sell in any language is going to be incredibly valued. Selling is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And so obviously something important and probably something you're all going to have to do. You're all going to, at very least, sell yourself. And you're probably going to have to sell other things like ideas, et cetera, throughout your career. I think coding is going to be slightly less valued. I still think it's going to be incredibly valuable. But it's so valuable today. It's probably one of the most valuable skills today that you could have. I think it'll be slightly less valuable in the future. I think art will be much more valuable than it is today. You're talking to someone who doesn't know I'm not very good at art, but luckily I'm already at a different generation than you, so I survived on my coding skills. I think SAT scores will be much less valued in the future. But I think kind of if you can combine both the left brain and right brain thinking, if you combine creativity with systems thinking, this will be something that will be incredibly good. I think majoring in business will be much less valuable in the future. I think majoring in philosophy would be much more valuable in the future. Philosophy is an incredibly hard major. I was an engineer here in Cal, but I think if I had minored in philosophy, it probably would have done me very well. And the most important thing is to be able to interact very well with computers. We all know that a long time ago, computers were able to beat man in chess, and they beat man very well today. Pretty much even a pretty crappy computer can beat any person in the world today, even the chess champion in chess. However, how many people are familiar with freestyle chess? So just a couple people. Freestyle chess is basically when a man and computer work together, or a group of people and a group of computers work together to beat other people plus computers. And people plus computers beat computers every time, hands down. So if you can work well with a computer, this is going to be a very important skill to have. I think this is probably the thing that for most people is the hardest, which is you really need to optimize for failure. It's very hard to grow very fast if you don't fail. And most people end up not putting themselves in positions to fail. And so rejection is important. Every single president that we've had since Kennedy has lost a major election in their lifetime before they became president. You don't have a linear path to success. And so, if you're Barack Obama, he challenged Bobby Rush for Congress, he got trounced. If you're George W. Bush, he ran for Congress, he got trounced. If you're Clinton, he lost for re-election when he was governor. If you're George H.W. Bush, he ran for Senate and lost. Reagan ran for president in '76 and lost. You can go down all the way down the line. And so if you're even the people who reach the very pinnacle, if you think of the President of the United States as one of the most prestigious things you could ever do, all these people at one point in their life were big losers. And so it's and they put themselves out there. And my feeling is they wouldn't have won the ultimate prize if they didn't actually put themselves out there at some point in their career and experience rejection and understand how to work with it. And so it's very important to be able to lose. Is anyone here familiar with the ELO score and how the ELO score works? Okay, a few hands went up. Basically, the ELO score, there's in many different things. Chess, it's most famous for you get basically a point system. Essentially, if you're playing someone who's just roughly 100 points below you, if you're 1,500 and you play at 1,400, you have essentially a 2/3 chance of beating them. So basically, 2 games out of 3, you should win. If you play somebody who's 100 points ahead of you, you have a 1/3 chance of beating them. Basically, 1 game out of 3, you should win. And so if you think about who you should play, that's actually quite good. If you're a 1,500 score, you should probably play people between 1,400 and 1,600. This is a really good range where you're really going to stress yourself. If you're a 1,400 and you play someone who's a 2,200, you have almost a 0 chance of winning. It's not worth, you shouldn't be playing that person. You're going to fail every time, not so interesting. But also if you're a 1,400 and you play somebody who's a 900, you're going to kill them every time. So it's not that interesting. Same thing if you've played a sport, if you played tennis. If I played Roger Federer in tennis, I'm never going to win. It's never going to be interesting. I'm never going to really learn. If I play my 2-year-old daughter, I'm going to crush her every time. Might make me feel good to crush my 2-year-old daughter, but I'm not going to increase my tennis skills. And so if your goal is to grow, and which as a relatively young person, that I think should be one of your main goals, you need to be putting yourself in a kind of a good band. And I think a 2/3 to 1/3 chance of failure is a really good band that you should be putting yourself in so that you could be focused on failing. And focus on failing is actually really important. 90% of the jobs that you'll get out of college that you probably could apply for, you have less than a 10% chance of failing at. You don't want to take those jobs. Your growth rate is going to be stunted. So you need to take jobs where they're actually going to put you in a position where you can fail, and where you can fail in a meaningful way that could hurt the company. Give you kind of another kind of thing. I think probably you've heard the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think that was true for a while, and this is kind of my very non-scientific graph, which is not at scale and totally made up. But I don't think it's true anymore. And so I think for a long time, what you know was, who you knew was more important. I think maybe kind of starting in the Renaissance, who you knew was started to be more important than what you knew. And for a very long time, and then it kind of peaked, maybe 10 years ago or so, that what you know was really, really important. Who you knew was really, really important. What you know is making a very big comeback, though. And the reason why who you knew used to be so important is because what who you knows did is they took the what you know and they put them together with another what you know, and they took a rent for the basically introducing people to one another. And if you think of all the professions, many of the professions that really accelerated in the 20th century, the corporate lawyer, the investment banker, the consultant, management consultant, et cetera, that's what they did. They were the who you knows. They took person over here and they put them together, person over here, hey, you two meet, I'm going to take my commission. Today, it's very much easier to find the what you knows. You have LinkedIn, you have Google, you have all these other types of things. So the what you knows are much more discoverable today than they were in the past. And you don't necessarily need to pay a rent to go find the what you knows. So if you're looking for a particular petroleum engineer who knows about gas valves in the Gulf of Mexico, you can go find that person yourself. And you don't necessarily need the who you know to put you in touch with them. I'm not saying who you know isn't important at all. It is. It's still incredibly important feature, and it's still incredibly good to have an important network in the who you know category. But the what you know is now making, I think, a comeback over the who you know, and it'll start to be more important over time. Now, when you think about what you know, and I'll get back to the what you know in a second. Let me go over. When you think about what you know, it's really important to be great at something. Being good at something is not good enough. You really need to be great at something. And so as you're trying to improve yourself, the tendency for most of us kind of overachiever type of people is to try to do something, take something that we're bad at and improve upon it. So some people here are bad at punctuality. Some people here are very messy and they're bad at being clean. Some people are bad at spelling or whatever it might be. And so the tendency is, oh, I'm bad at this, I want to get better at this. And usually the goal is to go from bad to mediocre, to go bad to average. I think that's a very bad strategy. And that's a very long-term bad strategy. I think what you really should be doing is focusing on what you're good at and what you actually intuitively like and become great at it. It's actually harder to go from good to great than to go from bad to mediocre, but it's way more valuable long-term for your career. And so you should be looking at kind of focusing on things that you like to do, that you're quite good at, that you're maybe known for with your group of friends, and then really investing in that particular skill so you become great at it and maybe even one of the best at that particular thing. Now let's talk about how to optimize for growth. This is kind of my idea about how to actually find a job. What you should be focused on. You're going to be in a position probably where you can get multiple job offers, I hope. When you are in that position, this is basically my heuristic of how you choose your job. So firstly, I think that a typical grad from a top tier college grows about 10% a year. Why do I believe that? No real study on it, but typically people 7 years out of college earn almost twice as much as when they got their first job right out of college. So that's basically 10% growth. I'm not saying income tracks growth, but it's a good substitute for it. And I think people grow roughly kind of 10% a year. Now, if you're thinking 10% is really, really low, I think you're right. I think it's crazy low. And I think if you are okay with growing 10% a year, you're insane. You should be trying to grow much, much, much faster than 10%, especially right when you come out of college. Right when you come out of college, you have a relatively low baseline. You're not old like me. And so you can grow at a much, much faster rate. At some point, when you hit your 30s, you're hopefully going to be at a higher level than when you came out of college, and it will be much harder to grow at a fast rate. So you should be trying to push your growth 20%, 25%, 30%, 35% a year on yourself. And you should be doing everything possible to grow. You'll see people in college right now who are like the superstars in college, 7 years out are no longer the superstars because they stopped growing. They basically relied on maybe their natural intelligence or something like that, but they stopped growing. It's really important to push yourself and grow. And I think there's 3 key ways to really, really grow when you're looking for a job. The first one is kind of the most obvious one, which is to surround yourself by people who are smarter than you. Maybe not everybody, because I assume you're an incredibly smart person, so maybe not everyone's going to be smarter than you, but hopefully a lot of people there are smarter than you, and they're going to really push you. The second one is what we talked about already. You need to have opportunities to fail. It's very important that you have opportunities to fail because it's really hard to grow unless you're really pushing yourself, and you're not going to be pushing yourself purely to the max unless you're worried about failure. So it's really important to be able to have opportunities to fail. And then the third one is you really want companies that have a history of giving people outsized responsibility or outsized promotions that look like you. So it's hard to grow if the only way to get more responsibility is to put in time. Because then, if you can only get more responsibility after being with the company for 5 years, or you can only get whatever might be a promotion after being in the company for 3 years or something like that, if you see a company like that, it's probably not a company you want to be at. You want to see lots of people who look like you who are able to get lots of responsibility. It doesn't mean you'll get the responsibility. You'll still have to prove yourself, but it means that you'll be in the position to get it if you do prove yourself. And having the more responsibility you can get is the more likely you'll have a failure. So it kind of like works together in that regard. So that's it. That's really all I want to cover today. I want to make the rest of this session very interactive. Hopefully you'll be more forthcoming with more questions than you had before. I do want to also say that we're hiring. So live at my company. So if you are looking for an internship or looking for a job after you graduate, please definitely let us know. So with that, I'll leave the floor open. It's your floor, and we can have a discussion about wherever we tend to go.
Thank you.
What's an example of a failure that you had that tangibly helped you grow?
I think all failures help you grow. So, essentially in any sales pitch, you're going to fail. So, it starts with everything. I was the guy who had to ask 4 girls out before I was able to get a prom date. Right? Maybe there are other people who are in similar situations that I was. And so I think anything like that where you're really kind of pushing yourself is something where you're really going to grow. Certainly, I've started companies that have failed outright. I've hired people that didn't work out. And so there's lots of types of things where you're in a position of failure. You want to be able to push yourself, and you want to be able to push yourself more than where your peers are at.
Thank you.
Hi. Earlier you mentioned like one of the metrics of growth was income. What are some other metrics they could talk about?
Yeah, I think income is a terrible metric for growth, but it's just the easiest one to measure. It's very hard to measure other metrics of growth. Internally, you sometimes know whether you're growing or not. You kind of feel yourself growing, feel yourself getting better at something. But it's very difficult to do that. It's easier if you really confine yourself to, like, let's say, a particular activity or sport. If you're rising up the ranks in tennis or in chess or something like that, you can tangibly see your growth. In some ways, that's very related to income in some sort of way. I think they're all terrible metrics, but there are no better metrics out there for growth. You kind of know it when you see it. You kind of can feel it in a way. If you're been giving a lot more responsibility, if you're rising faster than other peers, et cetera, then there's probably other ways to kind of measure growth.
I'll come back over there.
To be the outsourcer, not the outsourced, you said you have to be awesome at one thing. Do you have any tips on how to find that one thing to pursue?
It's a good question. You can be awesome at one thing or almost awesome at 2 things. And so there's kind of 2 strategies. So if you're almost awesome at 2 things that maybe people don't particularly pursue, maybe you know like a ton about classic cars and you know a lot about biology or something. There's all these weird things that can happen between the two. I can't think of it myself because I'm not good at either. But you can start building these very weird pathways between these two things. So that's one strategy, is to be like really, really good at two things or to be incredibly awesome at one particular thing. It's very hard to know what to be awesome at per se, but I think awesome at almost anything is really good. So you pick the thing you like the most and that you're already relatively good at. And so if you're really funny person, if you think you could be the funniest person in the world, that's actually like really good. And that would be a very good strategy for a career, is to be the funniest person in the world. But if you were like really funny and you were like moderately good looking, it's probably better to be funny than good looking. So you have to kind of pick, you have to kind of pick what you're trying to do.
I have two questions. The first one is, can you talk about your experience with Founders Fund? And the second one is, which company is your favorite investment?
Sorry, just experience investing is really what you're asking about, or?
Like your experience. The first question is about your experience with Founders Fund, and the second one is among like all the companies you have invested, which like pick your favorite investment.
So I'm a pretty active angel investor. I've invested in over 70 companies, and I'm not saying I don't think I'm a particularly good one. I think again, you have to kind of focus on what you're really good at. So I guess I call myself a recreational investor. I do it on the side, and it's very much of a hobby. I play tennis as a hobby. I play soccer as a hobby. I'm not particularly good at any of them. I think in my angel investments, I've been incredibly lucky. So I've made a very good return on them because I've been incredibly lucky, and being lucky is very important. I guess the one thing that I've focused on in angel investments that has worked out really well is I try to invest in very smart technical people, mostly very engineering oriented. If I saw like a team of 4 people and they're all engineers and they were working on a hard problem, that seems to be a very good bet. And the reason why it's turned out to be a good bet is because it's protected the downside. A lot of companies want to acquire 4 really smart people. And so my downside generally has been protected, where my upside's still uncapped. And when you invest in companies, the likely scenario is you lose everything. And so by protecting the downside, this has generally been an okay strategy. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I'm more of an expert at starting companies than funding other companies. And so I wouldn't necessarily ask me my advice of how to invest, but I gave it to you anyway, and it's worth what you paid for it.
Can you talk for a moment about Founders Fund?
Yeah.
I've been involved in a lot of different types of things, so I don't know that that's any different than
Like
anything
any
else.
other like your investment vehicles, like your platforms to invest in.
Yeah, I think the
companies.
best thing that I invested in by far, and there's been no better return, is investing in myself. And so just investing in my own entrepreneurial activities has led to outsized returns. We're talking returns in like the millions of %. And so it's by far the best returns I've had is investing in myself. And so if you believe in yourself, I would invest in yourself. Especially the younger you are, the more the investment will pay off. Obviously, you're investing in yourself right now by getting an education. And maybe hopefully by going into this hour lecture, hopefully it turns out to be a positive investment in yourself. Some of your lectures are probably negative investments, and you're on Facebook the whole time. But investing in yourself is probably the best thing that you could do.
At what point do you think we need to figure out what we're awesome at, what we should focus on? Is that something you should do before you graduate, or can you figure that out in the workplace at your first job?
You may never figure it out. But I think I think really what I'm saying is that you should be investing in what you're good at and getting better at it. And so you're going to have your first manager is probably going to make the same mistake that I made with when I gave people feedback in their yearly review or their quarterly review or something like that. I always focused what they weren't good at. And I always said, oh, if you could just get better on this type of thing. Here's a path. I'm going to help you get better. And they knew they were bad at it, so they were on board. They wanted to get better at it. So we would work together, and they did, and they made some improvement on it. I think it's bad for a person. It's bad for a manager to focus on that. Really, I hired them for a reason, which is that they were really good at these other things, and really should be focusing on that. By the way, I think this is. I'm not giving you romantic advice, but I think this is true there as well. If you're in a relationship, people often focus on like the negatives. Oh, can't you get better? You leave your socks on the ground or something like that, or whatever it might be. You're probably in a relationship with this person for a reason, because they're really, you find certain things about them very appealing. And if you fell in love with someone, you fell in love with them because you found certain things very appealing. They should just get better at those things. And just because that's the reason why you like them so much, and stop focusing on like the little nitpicky things. Because if you do, that relationship may not last.
Can you talk about when you realized you were great at something, even if you're not great at that now?
I think generally people intuitively know what they're good at. They have some sort of understanding about it. Either people have told them a lot that they're good at certain things, or they kind of inherently know what they're good at. And so I would just give my kind of advice to everyone is just to kind of figure that particular thing out.
In regards to the less valued versus more valued skills going into the future, let's say you were better at the less valued skills, would you still say you should improve upon those skills, or you should work on cultivating the more valued skills?
If you're really great at those quote unquote less valued skills, it's still going to be very, very good for you. There's this kind of meme around that everyone should code. Everyone in the world should code. And I'm sure you've seen it, and it sounds really good. And I think it'd be great if everyone could code. I think that's great. But that comes at a cost of those people learning something else. And so if someone learning to code means at cost of someone not learning how to sell, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. It'd be great if everyone could code. It'd be great if everyone could run a 4-minute mile. It'd be great for lots of things that are out there. But I don't think everyone has to code. I don't think everyone has to do lots of these things. If you're one of the best software developers out there, that is awesome. You're going to be that's great. And by the way, we will definitely hire you. But if you're going to only be kind of a mediocre software developer, probably not so good to focus on that particular skill.
You have a lot of experience in building teams, both at the very beginning stages of a startup and now as part of a slightly larger company in LiveRamp. What do you look for when you're hiring people, both at the beginning of an early stage versus now at a kind of more mid-sized company? Are there differences in what you're looking for? Or?
I think I mentioned earlier this idea of judgment. I think judgment is really, really, really important. Extremely hard to interview for, but really, really important. One of the reasons judgment is so important is when you're at a startup, one of the ways to have as little friction as possible is to have as few rules as possible. And so rules are very important in general. If you fly on an airplane, there's lots of rules, and there's a whole checklist of things that they need to do before the airplane can take off. And that's very good. Because you'd want to fly on an airplane with lots of rules because the downside is very, very high. Rules also cap your upside, and rules often allow people to operate in a very narrow band. And so when you're in a startup, you can't afford to make lots of rules because they'll really slow down progress. And so you probably don't have lots of rules about how to, code reviews or who can check in code to root. You probably don't have lots of rules around how money is spent. If you go to New York, do you spend differently in a hotel than you go to Philadelphia or something like that? You probably have like lots of, probably don't have really very many rules at all. In fact, in our company, we have one rule, which is basically do what's in the best interest of the company. That's the rule. So you have to figure it out, and basically that's all a judgment call. We trust you to make the right decision, to make the call as to what you should do and what the rules should be. And so you need to hire people with very good judgment who can operate within that environment. For many people, it's too unconstraining and they go insane. It's like the people who showed up in college and ended up being completely wasted for their first year here or whatever it might be, or couldn't hack it because all of a sudden there were fewer rules than their home environment. We all know that kid who where they just couldn't deal with that. You want a company is people with really good judgment, because you're going to operate with very, very few rules, and you're going to need people who can live with that, with those types of things.
Hi, so you've sold a number of companies in your career. When do you think is the right time to sell or exit your company, or even take your company public? Or is there even a right timing for that?
I wish I knew. It's a good question. I think these things are very personal to different people. Every single person mistimes it. Lots of people mistime it at some point. Either you sell too early or you sell too late, and so it's very difficult to know when you should sell and when you should not sell. It's very hard to know. It really depends. It's very personal. It depends on your own situation, and everyone is very different. And it's a lot easier to sell when you have it's a lot easier not to sell when you have tens of millions of dollars in the bank, and you really love what you do. If you don't love what you do, and someone gives you an offer, probably people want to sell. If you don't have tens of millions of dollars in the bank, it's very tempting to sell, and you have to really believe in what you do to not sell. It depends on your supportive infrastructure around you. It depends on many, many other factors as to whether you sell or not sell. Sometimes you have no choice but to sell, but in other times you do have a choice, and you have to figure that out.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about good judgment, how do you tell if someone has good judgment, or how do you measure that?
It's incredibly difficult to tell. So one nice thing is once you get a company of a certain size, let's say the company's of 8 people or something like that, people tend to look up and look around them for culture cues. We're humans, and humans tend to adopt to the culture that they're in. And so if you can just find a small number of people with really good judgment, people tend to be swayed either way. And then they're more likely to have good judgment if those around them have good judgment. So once you get to a certain size, you can take more risks on people. But when you're below a certain size, I think it's very risky to take those risks. And you may want to spend some time with that person. Obviously, the longer you've known that person, the longer you've had to observe that person. If you've been friends with that person for 10 years, you probably know very well whether they have good judgment or not. And so the more time you get to spend with somebody, so you could try before you buy. You can work with them on the weekends. You can do lots of other. If you can hire referrals from someone has good judgment, who then refers somebody else who has really good judgment. There's lots of different things that you can do in the beginning to try to minimize that risk.
Okay. Thank you.
So when you were talking about the job environment and the 3 rules for finding the right job, it seemed like you were focusing on creating a good environment for growth. Can you talk about some of the other things you think are effective for putting stress on yourself to motivate you to grow?
What are you thinking of?
Like setting tight deadlines for different tasks to force you to do them, or things like that.
Yeah, obviously there's strategies that we all do internally to grow, and if anyone's here trying to get in better shape, there's different things that you're always trying to do to get yourself in better shape, or if people are trying to eat healthier or whatever. Sometimes people self-motivate. Sometimes people get friends of theirs to help motivate them. There's all the common strategies. for growth, and I think they're all quite good and work on them. Generally, the peer kind of like work with certain peers are going to kind of affect you more. You don't want to let people down. So that's why working in certain environments are going to be better. You want to be put in certain, I do think the failure one is very important for growth, but there's many ways to grow. And some people have great self-motivation to really push themselves. Some people could be, locked in a room somewhere for 10 years and really grow. For others, it's much more difficult to do that.
Thanks.
So I have a question about like how did you come up with like the first startup you had, and like how did you know that it was the right time for you to jump into that, the startup you built?
Well, the first startup I had was when I was 7 years old, and I had a little lemonade stand in front of my house, and I made a lot of money. I have no idea how much it was, but it was at least in the dollars, and I was really happy and proud of myself. And so then I decided the next Saturday I was going to do it again. Unfortunately, the next Saturday, my father decided to charge me for rent for the space and for the table. And of course, he made me, I had to buy the lemonade, which was Tropicana lemonade that I took out of the freezer. And I had to buy the cups from him as well. And I ended up losing money. And it was very depressing. And then it took me many years before I decided to start a company again. But it was a good lesson. It was a very good lesson to have. So I think people are always. I think there's no great time to necessarily start a company. Some people start. Some people have been starting companies all their life. Other people start companies when they're 60 years old. And I think I don't think the goal should necessarily be to start a company. As I said earlier, I think the goal should be to think in an entrepreneurial mindset and to be growing. And you could do that in many different places. You don't have to start your own company to go do that. And that's not right for everybody. As society, we put a lot of esteem in entrepreneurs, and we talk about these business entrepreneurs with great reverence. And I don't know that we should. I think that's one of many things that one can do. And it's not the right thing for everybody, and certainly not right thing for everyone to do, like right out of college, for instance. I don't necessarily think it should be a goal for someone to do right out of college. For certain type of person, absolutely, but it's not for everybody.
If we're going through a career change and the past job doesn't seem completely relevant to the future job as far as skills that are developed, how would you recommend transitioning and making yourself relevant for the new career you want to work your way into?
I think it's important to get very good at something and then make sure people know that you're very good at it. So it really depends on what it is that you're doing the change into. But obviously, you need to have value to that employer and whatever they're looking for. So depending on what you're doing the change into, you need to kind of convince them that you've got real value in that particular thing. So I would just make sure you're really getting a key skill that you can point to. You only need one. So whatever that skill is, which is obviously if you want to move into a certain field, you're already interested in it, which means you're already probably good at something related to it. So really make sure you can prove, okay, this thing I'm really good at. I'm better than anyone else, at least that you could hire in this particular niche, in this particular thing, at this thing that you want to do.
I know that there's a conflict with an event, and I know some people are trying to manage both. So I'm wondering if you would take questions one off if people come up and speak with you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so incredibly much for your time. I truly am astonished.